Welcome to our review on detecting cations, the hydroxide precipitate test. So we've already had a look to see how we can use a flame test to identify some of the metal ions that could be present in an unknown solution. Now we're going to have a look at a different test that we could use. If we think about our group 1 hydroxides, they're all soluble in water, so they will dissolve in water. However, most other metal hydroxides are insoluble in water, so they won't dissolve. And that's why we use sodium hydroxide solution in our experiments. When we add sodium hydroxide to a solution containing metal ions, then we're going to form a precipitate. So remember, group 1 hydroxides are soluble. Sodium is in group 1, so therefore it is soluble in water, it will dissolve. Whereas if we mix it with something containing other metal ions, it forms a different metal hydroxide that's insoluble, so we actually get this precipitate forming, an insoluble solid. And the colour of that precipitate or insoluble solid that forms in our tube will tell us which metal ion we have present. So the way we actually carry out our hydroxide precipitate test is very simple. You have your test tube containing the unknown, and then using a pipette you're just going to add a few centimetres, so just about 2 centimetres cubed of our sodium hydroxide. So nice simple experiment there to do, and then we have a look at the colours. You do need to remember these colours, much like with our flame test, so again get that flashcard pack out and create some flashcards about these to help you learn them. Different chemicals this time that we're identifying compared to our flame tests. So if we end up with a green precipitate, then that would be iron 2, so Fe2+. If the precipitate is an orange-brown colour, then it's iron 3 or Fe3+. If it's a blue precipitate, then it's copper. If it's a white precipitate, it may be either calcium or zinc. So what we then need to do is carry out a further step to our experiment to identify is it calcium or zinc, because what we find is zinc hydroxide will dissolve and form this colourless solution if we add an excess of sodium hydroxide, whereas the calcium hydroxide won't dissolve. So if you end up with a white precipitate, then you add a few centimetres cubed more of our sodium hydroxide solution. If it then forms a colourless solution, it was zinc. If it doesn't and it stays with a white precipitate, then it was calcium. The last thing I've got for you here then is the equation for the reaction that we see, or at least one example of it. So in this example I've given you copper sulfate, and we're going to add our sodium hydroxide to it. So we'd form copper hydroxide and sodium sulfate. So make sure that you do practice writing out these balanced symbol equations for it. The other part I've given you there is the net ionic equation for the reaction, and again we're just going to focus on the bits involved in the reaction we are concerned with. So the copper 2+ ion reacts with the hydroxide ion to make our copper hydroxide. Hopefully at the end of this video you can now describe how to carry out the hydroxide precipitate test, and you can recall the colours that would allow us to identify those aqueous metal ions.